All righty. How's it going there?
Good.
Just one quick thing for Mark.
Mark is not
I
here.
was listening. He's not there today? Okay. Well, I listened when he was telling his incident. But anyway, I came home from work one time, and this was years ago, and I found my wife dead.
Oh, my goodness.
And the first thing I did is felt for a pulse, and, of course, she was already getting a little stiff, so I called 911. And the next thing I know, there's 9 cops in my house going through every single square inch. 3 of them are asking me questions simultaneously, some at the same time. And, like I knew I was in shock, and then they just said, would you consider coming down and taking a lie detector test? And I thought, why not? And I says, but I would like to call our son. And they said, well, you're not under arrest, but you can't talk to nobody and you can't call nobody.
What?
So I went down there, and while they were waiting for the lie detector specialist to come in, because this was 9 o'clock at night.
What year of, when was this?
This was in 2005.
And they're still pulling out the lie detector?
Yes. And I had no reason to, so I said, yes, I would do it. But in the meantime, the detective took me in his office while we're waiting for the guy to get there, and he's saying, look, you know what? Why don't you just admit to me you murdered your wife and we'll go easy on you?
Wow.
And he kept harping and saying, what would people say about you? I said, I have no idea. Finally, I said, I don't know what you're thinking, but we were together for 34 years. And he said, well, did you have a large insurance policy? I said, there was not 1 cent. Well, anyway, the lie detector guy came in, and for 2 hours he asked me question after question after question. And, of course, when I first got there, they said, you need to sign this. And I know it was, for duress, so, that they wouldn't, I couldn't come back on him. But I knew that I had nothing to hide. But for 2.5 hours, he harped and harped about, what would people say. And then with the lie detector test, they just went on and on and on. And finally, they concluded that it wasn't what it was. But on the other hand, I had just paid for my wife's license, and my son wanted it. And they said, we're going to keep that as evidence because we may come back 5 or 10 years later and charge you with murder.
When you said you were paying for her license, what do you mean? What does that mean?
I paid for a driver's license to get her driver's license, and it had her picture on it. And my son wanted that as, something from his. And they said, no, we're keeping that as evidence in case we decide to charge you with murder later. Well, anyway, they had the autopsy. It was ruled, they found out it was a massive heart attack. And, but I will always carry guilt, thinking that if I wasn't at work, might have saved her. But it was just the idea to have to go through that and not being able to call my son or anybody for like 6.5, 7 hours.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I don't know how the police can say that you're not under arrest. You don't have to come down and talk to the lie detector person. But if you're going to come down and talk to the lie detector person, you can't talk to your son or make a phone call? That sounds like a lie to me.
Not to mention, the story is really heartbreaking, and you must have been very upset at the time. Did not let you call any family members and inform them what happened, or, at least be able to speak to anyone. That's very harsh. I don't feel like they're treating you very humanly.
No, it was hard, and I knew I was in shock, and it took a while. I'll always feel guilty, but it's just the fact that I think they went about it the wrong way, and they told me, well, we're being accused of not doing our job, and they just went at thing after thing, and with 9 of them, and them going through every single square inch in my house, and then they confiscated 45 bottles of medicine, not to mention the medical papers that I had when the wife got out of the hospital, because the day before I had her in the hospital, and they told her to go home and drink fluids. And
right, so why would they assume before they even figured out all of the evidence? If you were the murder, why would they tell you that you murdered her?
They always presume. I mean, their number one suspect is always the spouse. I mean, in almost every situation where a husband or wife dies, it's the spouse who's the number one suspect, and there's usually good reason for that. I mean, it's usually not some random killer.
But it was just the immediate assumption that his wife was murdered.
Oh yeah,
instead of assuming it was natural causes.
Instead of doing investigation, yeah.
Right, they always jump to conclusions.
You have to excuse me, my cat's trying to get in 2 cents too. But But the thing was that they were asking me what would my neighbors say, and I said, look, I have no idea what anybody would say. Well, did they hear you argue? I said, I don't know, possibly. I said, I don't know who listens and who says what about anybody. And but anyway, I wasn't found guilty or anything, and they just
thank goodness. How would you have done it differently this time? I mean, if you could do it all over again, obviously, without hope. If you could do it all over again, I'm sure you wouldn't want your wife to die. But if you could do the rest of it over again, when the police were demanding or asking you to take the lie detector, would you have done it, knowing what you know now?
Yes, because I had nothing to hide. But I would have called my son before anything else, before they got there. Because I was living in another state and he was living in Minnesota.
Do you feel like the lie detector somehow helped you prove that you had nothing to hide, or was it just a frustration that ultimately, there was never anything they had in the first place, so had you not taken it, it wouldn't have damaged you?
I found that to be really, because it was one of those that they put not only on my fingers, on my chest, on my waist, and
sounds humiliating.
That they asked. I mean, it didn't bother me, but, they would ask me things like, did I ever in my life intend to put harm to anybody?
Mike, thanks for telling your story, man. I do appreciate it. There's more coming up here on Free Talk Live.
Free Talk Live, 7 nights a week from 7 to 10 Eastern, live on the Liberty Radio Network at LRN.FM.